Hey guys, Kelly Stewart here, looking nice and sleepy for you. We're having a really great conversation on constitutional sheriffs, and so we're going to go ahead and go live and let you guys be a part of the conversation. Roger Roots, right behind me, has dedicated countless hours to Ryan Bundy's defense back in Portland, and Joe Robertson, and now he's helping Jake Ryan with his sentencing details. So let's step up and give them a hand. Roxanna can get out of here as soon as she raises $5,000 or 13 hours, whichever comes first. So come hang out with us. We're gonna have a little family discussion on constitutional sheriffs. Share this. Are you sharing this, Gavin?
Yep.
Get this shared around and join our conversation.
On the shares.
So let's see.
Where's John Lamb?
Wait, yeah, we need John Lamb in this.
And let's point it at Roxanna.
Oh, no. Well, maybe I point it back here and kind of gets the group.
Flip it. You can set it in one spot and flip it back and forth. Those of us that are talking should sit up close, though, or they won't be able to hear through all this.
Okay, so
Sharing right now.
we are going to go ahead and let you guys be a part. So Roger Roots.
This is a historical constitutional
discussion
right here.
So Roger, who are you and why should we care what you have to say?
I'm not sure you should care.
Yes, we
should. My name is Roger Roots. I'm a Montanan. I'm an attorney.
Uh-oh, stop right there.
I know. I'm a constitutional, what would I call myself?
Activist.
I would call myself a scholar. And I actually will say that I'm a scholar because I've written and published a few actual law review articles on
Yes, you
So
have.
Many people call themselves constitutional scholars. There are probably thousands. But I'll say that I really am truly one, in addition to all those other thousands. Because I've written a few things that have been published in some law review journals and things.
One of them you should go check out is Our Police Constitutional.
Our Cops Constitutional, originally published in the Seton Hall Constitutional Law Journal, maybe more than 12 years ago.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to set this down now, and then we've got David Fleeman with us, our faithful warrior who has stood by these Nevada Patriots for over a year now, who hates getting public praise, but let me tell you, most things that get done around here would not get done without this man. I can attest to that. And then we have Gavin Syme over here, who nearly got himself arrested tonight, and we are so thankful he did not. Ammon Bundy actually called, and he wanted to go live off the Bundy Ranch page. And, oh, I can't see it from the light. And I told Ammon what was going on, and he said, I want to pray for Gavin. So we stopped and prayed for him, and I was moved by that because here we have a man sitting in solitary confinement, praying for his activist friend on the outside that he not be abused, and he continued praying that his liberties would be protected today, and they were. So thank you, Lord, for that.
Rogers University.
That's right. I forgot to mention, in addition to my other great feats, I am the founder of Lysander Spooner University.
That's right.
One of the, you could say, the premier institutions of higher learning in the Western world.
And do you want to
You're talking like a lawyer over here.
Uh-oh. Are you going to want to sit down, or are you guys going to stand right there? Or?
I'll stand briefly until I'm no longer able to stand.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just sit here and try to map.
All you'll have to do is flip it back and forth.
Okay. So can you tell us, Roger, the name, before we go back to constitutional sheriff, what does Lysander Spooner mean?
Well, for those who don't know, Lysander Spooner was one of the greatest freedom writers of the 1800s. He was a guy who lived in Massachusetts, born and raised in Massachusetts. You could say he was of Puritan stock, probably English ancestry, and he was a guy who was well studied in let's say, Anglo-American libertarian theory. Here's a great book, The Lysander Spooner Reader. He wrote great essays. He was an abolitionist, of course. This was before the Civil War. Ironically, he supported the right of the South to secede, even though he was an abolitionist. Very interesting individual. He wrote about freedom constantly. He actually is sometimes known as an anarchist, frankly, because he actually would, the guy's writings are so relevant even today. He would go through constitutional texts and really analyze the writings of the founding fathers and things. He actually argued that no one was really bound by the Constitution itself who didn't himself sign it. And just think about how radical that is. A lot of conservatives would reject that today. You know, we all revere the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But Lysander Spooner actually argued that no one who didn't sign it himself could be bound under principles of natural law and natural rights. No one who didn't sign it himself could be bound by it. Very interesting writings, and I would invite any reader or viewer to read the writings of Lysander Spooner, one of my great heroes. And it's a shame that no one ever founded any kind of a college or university in his name until I did so. And I'm very proudly the founder and the owner of Lysander Spooner University. We hope to turn this into one of the great institutions of higher education as the years go by. We've been putting on a lecture series. We've had John Lamb speak. We've had Angela Parker speak. She gave a tremendous lecture. We've had Neil Wampler speak. Ken Medenbach was scheduled to be one of our keynote speakers at a recent event. The enemies of freedom prematurely took him away from us, arrested him before he was able to give that speech. We hope to reconnoiter with Ken at some point and have him do a future keynote address. Who else has spoken at some of our events?
I don't know, but while you're talking, why don't you plug your university?
LysanderSpoonerUniversity.com, all right, is the website. By the way, I don't use edu. It's not like one of these, frequently you'll see these universities and colleges with an edu web address, okay? But a lot of people don't realize, in order to get an edu web address, you need to be government approved and go through the accreditation of government. All right, Lysander Spooner University will never submit to that. So the website is LysanderSpoonerUniversity.com. Again, that's LysanderSpoonerUniversity.com. And we're going to have some events and some lectures and symposia in the near future, even right here in Nevada.
Awesome. So now we can go ahead and get into the topic of constitutional sheriffs. Sheriff Mack kind of opened this conversation for us by blessing us with his presence here in Nevada and not actually getting anything productive done. And so that definitely got people talking, because Sheriff Mack is a part of the group called, what, the Constitutional Sheriffs Association, and he came and met Ammon Bundy, and Ammon said to me tonight, the first words out of his mouth were, I'd like you to tell the people out there to go home. That's how he opened.
That's
so
how Mack opened.
That's how Sheriff Mack opened.
Right.
And then he didn't come and speak to us. You'd think a constitutional sheriff would come and speak to peaceful protesters on private property waving American flags, perhaps. So anyway, that's going to open up our conversation now, about constitutional sheriffs. And now we can pick up where
I'll just start out. I would like to have a debate even with commenters here on this live stream. I reject the idea of this concept of the constitutional sheriff. I challenge anyone, because I've done it myself just as a lawyer, trying to write a brief or something, some kind of legal memo about this concept. Try to find the case where the Supreme Court, or where any court, any state Supreme Court, ever said such a thing. As you'll frequently see, I guess this imaginary concept is that the sheriff is the highest authority among us, or the highest authority in our land, and that somewhere, somehow, someplace, some sheriff somewhere may have stood up to the federal government. I've never seen it. I'm willing to entertain a historical discussion of where that might have ever happened.
I'll counter you on that.
All right, let's have Gavin talk about it.
Gavin sign.
Authority is inherent in the natural right. So life, liberty, and property is the inherent natural right of everyone. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean there's our common standard. If you, let's say Roger, if you're in your town and there's a lynch mob, and they're about to lynch a man, and you take you take David and you take John and me and you take 10 people, let's say, and you head down at the head of the column down there and you say, we're not going to have a lynch mob in this town, and you're going through me first. You just became the authority because you became the protector of life, liberty, and property. Now, let's take that to the sheriff. People say that the sheriff's the highest. Well, some people mistakenly say the sheriff is the highest authority in the county. And I think we can universally agree that that's not true, because the people's rights and the Constitution affirming those rights in a county will be the highest authority. A sheriff does not have the authority to violate someone's rights any more than the federal government does. And there's often a misconception on this that says, oh, in our county, we can make a law that says you have to have a permit to build a house on your property. No, the county doesn't have any authority to control someone's property, and the sheriff doesn't have any authority to enforce that. But to me, what makes the sheriff the highest authority in the county is it has nothing to do with Supreme Courts or state legislatures or anything else. Because when the Supreme Court violates the law, even back to John Locke, the magistrate, when he steps outside of his lawful authority, ceases to be a magistrate. Just like the magistrate that had Josh Martinez hauled away for 15 days for contempt of court today because he asked her a question and she didn't like it and he wouldn't apologize to her. So in her pride and arrogance, she said, I'm sending you to jail with no due process. And now he's down there in the Las Vegas City jail with no due process, locked away in jail. Her authority ceased. At that point, the only authority was the point of a gun to a head. If he had resisted, he would have been punished. And the officer standing in that courtroom became the lawless gun wielders that would uphold her thuggish authority. But if you had a sheriff in that county who did his job, he would have come into that courtroom and he would have said, whoa. Or rather, his deputies already would have been there in that courtroom. The reason they would have been the highest authority is not simply because the sheriff was elected. The people in the delegated authority say, we're going to grant a piece of our authority to the sheriff to protect our rights equally, but only those rights. And so the people have consented to make this man, by voting for him, the defender of life, liberty, and property in their county. However, even in the absence of voting, if you came in and said, I'm going to defend this man, this judge is under arrest, under the common law, you would still be a lawful authority if you were upholding the law. The problem is, usually the sheriff's on the side of the judge and you would get hauled away too. But I would contend that what makes the sheriff the highest authority in the county is not some magical mumbo-jumbo or legislation. It's that the person who is delegated to defend life, liberty, and property by the people becomes the delegated authority in the county to do that. But his authority ends where the people's rights begin. And so on that note, we have no constitutional sheriffs, because despite the fact that people are electing them and these guys get up there and say Constitution, Constitution, not one sheriff in this country will defend the Constitution. So I think you're right in the large sense, but I do think the sheriff is the highest law enforcement authority in the county, if only because the people have said he is the head of law enforcement in our county, or of protection of our rights. But the authority over anything, and if you're a biblical person, this will go to Romans 13. There is no lawful authority but from God. And that goes to our rights. And so therefore the person defending people's rights is at that moment the authority, and the person who refuses to defend or who violates those rights is the opposition of lawful authority.
But then how would you, if you say the people are the ones who give that authority, then what about the people these days who have now given that authority to the federal government? And they literally say the federal government has the right to do whatever they want to do. They're the highest law of the land. And we say, no, we didn't elect them. I mean, some of us say that we didn't elect them, so that's not how it should be.
But take Romans 13 again. There's no lawful authority, because the church in America is always using Romans 13 to beat us down and say submit, submit, submit. But all it takes is a few minutes of looking up those words, and it says that there's no lawful authority but from God. And the atheist says, well, there's no God. And I say, well, do you believe you have your life, liberty, and property? And he's like, yeah, don't take my life, don't take my car, and don't take my stuff. And so I say, well, whatever, we're on the same page there. But if there's no lawful authority but the one defending that life, liberty, and property, that means the people, he goes on to say in Romans 13, those that resist that authority will be judged. If you as a voter say, I can vote away the rights of Gavin, you're no more of a lawful authority than any other thug. So let's say the community gets together. Let's make it personal. The community gets together, Roger, and they vote away Kelly's house. Why don't we all get together and we vote that Kelly's car is now ours, and we're just going to take it?
I don't think you want to do that, Gavin.
Okay, let's let
By the
Roger
way, it
comment
actually
on
has
this.
happened. I mean, you look at
That's exactly what we're doing.
all
Okay.
redistributive taxation, and it's
Yes.
actually the way the federal government, all state governments actually function. Is people elect someone, and they believe that they have ceded all this jurisdiction over their lives, and then that representative passes legislation along with others to take stuff from one individual, give it to another individual, to take stuff from one group and give it to other groups, and this is the society we're living in. If there were, by the way, an actual constitutional sheriff anywhere, he'd be killed very quickly in modern American life.
Right.
Because, frankly, the federal government has taken over so much control over our daily affairs. You look at out here in the West, I mean, just a vast, just thousands of acres of land that are claimed by the federal government, claimed to be managed and controlled and even owned by the federal government. If a so-called constitutional sheriff were to rise up and take a stand in any of these counties in the West, in Nevada especially, or anywhere in the West, were to barricade his county, drive off the Forest Service, BLM, EPA, what have you, he would be quickly taken out, imprisoned, if not killed, by the federal government. And that's the reality in every county in the West. Right now.
So let me ask you this then, going to the one that many of us kind of hail as a hero, per se, sheriff from the county where they were headed to have the constitutional meeting.
That's what I was thinking about.
I wasn't
yeah.
gonna. So, could he be a constitutional sheriff?
He leaned
Truly,
more towards
Grant
the
County,
Constitution
than the
Oregon.
others, but he
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily maybe a I don't know. I'm just asking.
Grant County, Oregon. Has he actually taken a stand to barricade his county against the federal government? Has he actually, put a perimeter out and defied the federal BLM or the Department of Interior? Has he? I mean, just
Is he arresting judges that are violating due process?
follow the logic. No, he's not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I'm not even picking on him. I'm not
No,
even
he's
picking
a
on
good-
Sheriff Mack. but-
No, he's a good. There's a lot of good people out there, but when they try to hang this title of constitutional sheriff, then all of a sudden you start analyzing them, and then you find out whether or not they're telling the truth. So it's not that they're bad people; they're great people, probably.
Well, a constitutional sheriff is only as strong as the people who are willing to back him.
Yep. There you go.
If you've got a man that's willing to stand, you've got to have good people behind him that are willing to back him up. And then it becomes not one man, but a whole community, a whole county that's willing to say, we back our sheriff up and we will defend him as he will defend us.
Well, the true bottom line of all government, every government has a nature. There's never been a good government. Lysander Spooner talks about that. Never in history has there been a good government.
Right.
Every government that ever existed ultimately came for all power, all money, all property, all freedom, and to kill all who resist. That's every government that ever existed. Now, the Founding Fathers recognized this. Most, I think, logical thinkers over time recognize this. And so we realize that what we want is the most limited government we can possibly have. What we want are the greatest limitations that bind the state and bind the government according to natural rights and natural law principles. And of course, it has never really worked. The American experiment is probably the closest. It's been a wonderful experiment. It has worked to some extent. Americans have lived freer than most of the people in the world. But you have to admit that we're living under a tyranny right now, and it's under the guise of all of these paper constitutions, paper sets of laws and codes and statutes. And, you know, there's a lot of good things that can be said and a lot of bad things that can be said. But frankly, virtually every American has a 9-digit numerical sequence that he's required by government to memorize and go around repeating to government. You know, we can't travel, we can't board an airplane without government documents. We
Can't even go see a doctor without they ask for your little number.
Try to start a business, see what happens. Try to become a hairdresser.
You
Try to
can
have
vote without a license, though.
David Fleeman says you can vote without a license.
Yeah, you can. Here in Nye County.
Well, all right, that's something, you know.
I mean, they don't even let you leave the hospital now with your baby if you don't give them a number.
And
Or they
why do
try
they
to
let
stop
people
you.
Vote without a license?
Yeah, you can vote without a license, but you can't leave the hospital with your baby without a social security number.
Yeah. They
So it
proved
shows
that
where
with
the
Vaughn.
power is. They're more concerned about labeling the child than they're about protecting the voting rights, which dictates who's in our office.
Well, it's okay when you can have dead people that were Republicans their whole life, and then after they die, all of a sudden they start voting Democrat. you know?
Right.
Well, what about the Republicans that talk about limited government their entire political lives until the moment they get elected, and well, then they stop talking about limited
Yeah,
government
well,
so much.
They're what we call rhinos.
Well, it's called Potomac fever at the federal level.
Yeah.
At the state level, it's called Helena fever or Carson City fever or whatever else. I mean, remember, you know, there's a school of economic thought known as public choice theory. Public choice theory. All right, there's a school of economic thought, public choice theory, which is just the proposition that people who live political lives have interests just like the rest of us. Just like in the business world, we have an interest in making more money. If you're an employee, you have an interest in getting as much wages as you can. A politician has an interest in getting elected, and of course he'll do what it takes to get elected and promise freedom, limited government, etc. But the moment that he actually gets elected to an office, his interest changes, and his self-interest changes to doing what? Well, perpetuating his office, expanding his office, growing his power. So his fundamental interest, and you can't expect people to be any different because it's human nature.
Right.
We notice that Roxanna Ryan now is succumbing to itches.
Yeah,
There she
that-
goes.
it's just- we'll
Succumbing
get
So
to-
a few people are saying get her out of there. So I'm gonna say this for my own sanity because I have enough people hating on me right now. I didn't ask. Whoa, that's a bad light for me. I look like a zombie. I didn't ask.
There you go.
That's
Is that
still a
better?
bad light. I think I just need to leave Camp Liberty for a week and sleep. I did not ask Roxanna Ryan to go into this. I'm not receiving any of the funds. I never receive any of the funds from these. So it's her PayPal for Jake that's been listed. She showed at the camp and said, I came to go into the chamber. So let's
Kelly, I heard a rumor that you're getting rich off of all this.
Oh, shut up.
It's better with the
So
lights. I thought
anyway,
it was
I just wanted to say that this is her choice, guys. She wants to be in there. If you guys can help her raise $5,000, we might be able to pull her out by her pretty braids. She's a strong woman. She's got stronger hands than most men, and she's willing to work hard for anything she receives. And this is not like her to do something like this and receive any funds, but they are paying people to help Jake Ryan right now prepare for sentencing. And so that's where these funds are going to go. So please hop onto the PayPal and help her out if you can. A little bit ago she was at $700. So let's get her out of there. Luana, I'm sorry I didn't do it. I promise. I'm not guilty of everything in this community. I promise. So let's get her out of there. $5,000 or 13 hours. And if she has to stop and she wants somebody else in there, I'll go in and finish her 13 hours. So let's get to the 5,000 so neither one of us have to spend the night in the torture chamber. You brought up a few minutes ago, where'd you go? Why can't I see you? You brought up a few minutes ago the Oh, it's still on me, that's why. The baby, the social security number, and I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about baby home, or if that's where you were leading up to, or...
If John's here, he would know that story better than I do. But I want to say, no, Kelly had nothing to do with this. I came, like I said, because I wanted to stand. I wanted to stand like Ammon did. And I wanted to stand for just the knowledge that, to share a little bit of what Ammon had suffered. It's not even about the money. There's so many good people here that deserve help, that have given so much time. Gavin, Kelly, Roger, David. The list could go on and on that deserve help for what they have done. And this is to share with them too.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you know that happened to Ammon for anybody who's watching this and does not know? Or, I mean, why are you in here? Why are you standing in a cell in the middle of
I'm gonna let
the desert?
Kelly, because Kelly, she's the one that talked personally to Ammon on this. He was tortured by the guards unjustly and wrongly, and spent 13 hours in a cement stall like this, without food, without water, chained both in the hands and in the feet.
And I was going to add that at some point we're going to try to reenact the food cart, where the food cart passed by Ammon without serving him on several occasions. We're going to maybe construct a food cart, fill it full of food, and we will reenact. We will pass right by Roxanna Ryan here.
What do you mean? What are you referring to the food cart for? When he was in the shower?
Right. Ammon
It
was
kept-
not, he had no food whatsoever. The food cart would come down the hallway and would absolutely bypass.
So that would have been, so they said he actually went in at like 11:30 at night, and he was in there 13 hours. So that would have been breakfast and lunch the next day that they would have skipped him. Why would Core Civic, CCA, Southern Nevada Detention Center, private prison, prisons for profit, why would they do that to somebody?
And you know what really bugs the heck out of me with all that? We had Sharon, all those people go in and said nothing was done illegal. Now, if that's the case, how many prisoners are being tortured across the United States legally?
Legally.
Yeah. You know, that's scary. And if they could have kept him in there for 72 hours.
Yep.
I know what I felt like for 5 hours. I have no clue what she felt like for 10 hours. And she's kind of built thin like I am, so she probably is feeling the same pain that I was, and I only did it for 5 hours. What about those people that are big bone people that can barely move their hands behind them, and
Yep.
they're in there and they can do them for 72 hours?
And they suffer.
How many people's had blood clots that would cause strokes because of that?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Horrible.
That is.
In Schaefer Cox's letter, he described 12 different kinds of tortures that he has seen in the CMU he is at in Marion, Illinois. 12 different kinds of tortures.
Do you remember any of those offhand that he's brought up?
I don't. Solitary, but I don't remember. But there was 12 of them that he listed in his letter that he personally has seen take place in the CMU that he is at.
On that note, if $3,000 hasn't been raised by 2 a.m. for Roxanna Ryan.
You're going to come up with 2,000 out of
We
your
will
checking
begin
account.
waterboarding her.
Don't say that. He's kidding, you guys. He's kidding.
That was one of the tortures.
That Schaefer Cox mentioned.
Yeah, the Schaefer Cox mentioned.
Well, we have this problem because we keep saying, well, this is lawful or there's a law, and something cannot be lawful that violates the Constitution, or in the larger sense, that violates a man's rights. And so I keep hearing from sheriffs and officers, it's lawful, I'm defending the law, I'm doing my job. But they're not. I was arguing with these Metro police down there today, and I said, well, what's your job? And they said, well, to protect the people. And I said, well, what people? The politicians, the judges? Because you're certainly not protecting the law. And I named off 3 or 4 areas that this man today had his rights violated. And they said, well, we're not going to talk about that. That's not our job. That's not our area. And so they just talk in circles. But the law, if you're paid to defend the law, that means you're paid to defend not what a legislator says, but the life, liberty, and property of those around you. Because that's the law. And so we have sheriffs like Sheriff Worley here in town, and they review all this stuff that happened with Ammon. And she says, well, that's not against the law. They did fine. That was company policy. If you go into Walmart, this was her comparison. If you go into Walmart, you have to follow their policy too. Well, number one, I've gone into Walmart many times, and I've occasionally disobeyed their policy. For example, when the Walmart person at the door wants me to search my bags to make sure my receipt has everything on it. Now, we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but I've said no. Well, I don't. I just run. But I sound. And I've said before, no, I don't consent to any searches, and I've walked out. But here's the thing. Walmart or any other company can choose not to sell to me if they want to, right? They can say we don't want to serve you, and they have that right as a private entity. They don't have the right, because I violate their policy, to lock me in a 3x3 cage without food and water indefinitely. That's not a policy. That's a crime. And so when your sheriff says a crime is now a policy, they are no longer a sheriff. They're no longer law enforcement. They're no longer upholding the law, and they no longer have lawful authority. At that point, no matter how polite or how likable or how great of a politician this supposed sheriff is, their only authority now is a gun to the head of the person that they're extorting, abusing, kidnapping, or taking away to a concentration camp or a 3x3 shower cell.
So on that note, I want to ask Roger Roots to give us a brief explanation as to why cops are not constitutional. Since we're talking about sheriff's authority and the police's authority and their job to uphold the law, you've explained it to me a few times about the difference between the sheriff and deputies versus police. Is that where?
And you seem to never remember, so I have to constantly.
That's not true. That is not true. I'm just trying to get you to talk. Everybody's tired of hearing me.
It's absolutely true. At the time the Constitution and Bill of Rights were written and ratified, there was no such thing as professional police officer anywhere in the United States, any of the colonies, or anywhere else really in the Anglo-American establishment. The idea of professional policing really did not exist until the Jacksonian period, which is essentially the 1830s. So the Bill of Rights was written when there was no such thing as professional law enforcement. Now there were constables, and here or there were sheriffs, county sheriffs and things, elected officials, but most of the work they did was civil, not criminal in nature. They would serve executions and civil process and things. The idea of a cop as a crime fighter is actually a fairly new concept. The idea of cop as crime fighter essentially is from the 20th century. You go back into history, and I did this in that article, actually, which became a chapter in my book, The Conviction Factory, The Collapse of America's Criminal Courts. And I urge you, any of you, to go ahead and go on Amazon.com, find this book, and purchase it for yourselves. My article, Are Cops Constitutional, is a chapter in this book, actually. It was originally published in the Seton Hall Constitutional Law Journal, probably back in about maybe 2004. But anyway, I went through a lot of historical documents and historical texts. If you really go back in time, even to what is known as the Wild West, the sheriffs that existed in the western frontier actually were, you could say, they were the executive branch. You know, they were functionaries of local government. Again, most of what they did was civil, not criminal in nature. There was no such thing as crime investigation being a central focus of law enforcement. It just absolutely was not even on their agenda. Wyatt Earp and these sheriffs, these famous sheriffs that we revere today as these great gunfighters and things, they actually spent most of their time cleaning sidewalks, sweeping the streets and things. They were the executive branch of government, is what they really were. We've just transformed these agents today into these crime fighter or law enforcement, crime investigator kind of roles, which is not the original intent of the Constitution. Again, the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, none of them knew of a police force. There was no such thing as a police force in 1791 when the Bill of Rights was ratified.
So what did they do if somebody committed murder or a really bad crime? Who would take care of it?
A lot was done by posse,
Really?
private citizens. In fact, every private citizen had a duty to engage in law enforcement. Every private citizen could do what we call citizens arrest. They were just called arrests back then. And no government agent had any greater power.
And then would they
than
have a civil
private citizen
court,
had.
or they just go ahead and just lynch mob type mentality, or?
Well, actually, I think a lot of things were, one of the greatest books ever written about sort of first-hand knowledge of American life back during the Jacksonian period, the 1830s, was by a Frenchman named de Tocqueville.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Alexis de Tocqueville, very famous book. I believe it was called Democracy in America. Anyway, if you read that book, that's a first-hand account of a Frenchman who traveled to America, and he spent about a year traveling through, New York and Connecticut, all the way down into the Carolinas and elsewhere, and wrote down what he saw, and he was very observant about American life.
I think, was it a John Locke liked him and based a lot of his stuff on him, I think. Was
Well,
it John
probably
Locke?
the other way around. I think John Locke came earlier. Let me think. John Locke, of course, was written. Jefferson,
John Locke was pre-constitutional.
Yeah, Jefferson
Oh.
wrote a lot about John Locke.
Okay, okay, maybe it was Jefferson that looked at this guy too.
Yeah, John Locke was a source for a lot of natural law theory among the founders, the constitutional framers. Tocqueville, I guess what he really contributed was this first-hand account of democracy in America. And he talked about how free Americans were compared to the people in Europe. And in several places in that book, which I referenced in that article and in this chapter, Tocqueville talked about how little government there was on the streets. Just think about this. It was almost a paradox. There was so little government on the streets, and yet there was so little crime, and there was so much freedom. And of course, that freedom was not universal. We all recognize this. Slavery, women were property, all of those things.
Yeah.
But law enforcement was the duty and the role of every citizen. And there was such a thing as the hue and cry. When a crime was committed, let's say a robbery or something, people had a duty to shout out, hey, someone's just been robbed. And every citizen, this was back during this sort of republicanism theme of civic life, where any American had a duty to sort of grab his rifle and go and chase after the bandit.
The outlaw, because he
the
lived
outlaws.
outside the law, and once
Yeah.
they had committed outside the law, then they were open game pretty much to any citizen if he was labeled as an outlaw. He lived outside the law.
Well, and just to be clear, though, under the law, there still had to be due process. So there still had to be indictment from a grand jury, And grand juries then were nothing like they are now, where it was some mystical thing. They always, we're seeing charges come down all the time. We can never. It doesn't seem to me that we can never even verify where the grand jury happened. You have prosecutors bringing felony charges, and according to the Constitution, there's supposed to be an indictment of a grand jury. And oftentimes they'll say, "Oh, there was a grand jury." Well, where is this mystical grand jury? Who is on this mystical grand jury? The grand jury was supposed to be made up of the civilianry, and that was the, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the instigation of due process. Is there a crime? Was this crime committed? The grand jury would determine essentially if that probable cause existed and whether it should be taken to trial and action should be taken. Now, an officer arrests you on the vaguest of mere suspicion, probable cause, whatever they like to call it, even though usually they don't have any probable cause as required in the Fourth Amendment. Then it simply goes before a judge who, in my experience, without fail, says, I agree there's probable cause. There's no grand jury. Now you just have a judge most of the time agreeing that there is probable cause, and the grand jury, even though it's the law, is completely ignored.
It's amazing how much things have changed. It's amazing how much the system has changed. Little things make a big difference. The idea of transcripts are actually fairly new, so grand jury transcripts, probably there was no such thing in, let's say, 1912 or something. But when grand jury hearings started to be recorded for the first time, it was a critical mistake in the legal profession and in constitutional practice, let's say, that the transcripts were given into the custody of the prosecution and not where they really belong, which is in the hands of the grand jurors themselves. Really, when you think about it, grand jury transcripts belong to the grand jury. They don't belong to the prosecution. But in modern practice, at the federal level and every state level, where there is grand jury practice, you see that the transcripts are all held in the hands of government prosecutors. That's not as originally intended. Originally, remember, any grand juror, his memory was just as equally as good as any prosecutor was about what happened in front of the grand jury. And, Gavin talked about how fundamentally the grand jury process has changed. At one time, in order to get a criminal accusation against someone, a complainant would have to go to a grand jury if it was a felony charge, if he wanted a felony charge. He would have to go to a grand jury and stake out his grounds for probable cause. The grand jurors originally had all kinds of powers. They actually were not always just stationed in a courthouse like they are today. They could travel. They could go out into people's fields, or they would sometimes meet in each other's living rooms and things. And it's fundamentally changed. Today, in modern practice, in most levels, especially the federal level, which we're all familiar with, a prosecutor really initiates everything, initiates the grand jury process, and there is no complainant. In other words, the government is the complainant today. And so, you have all these victimless offenses, which probably would not have been the case in 1873 or something.
Well, and can we talk about the felony for a moment? Because the felony is something that's been so fundamentally perverted. So we say, number one, well, you lose your gun rights because you're a felon. Well, first of all, there's no basis in the Constitution for that. In fact, it wasn't uncommon that the first thing you would do when you got out of prison is go and get your gun back. I mean, they would give it to you on the way out. So the felony, if you go to the Fifth Amendment, it talks about the grand jury for all capital crimes or infamous crimes shall be from a grand jury. Well, a felony is a capital crime. If you go back to the historical context, this idea that everything's now a felony, right? I'm at the grocery store today, and it's saying, pet abandonment is a felony, and there's a sign at the grocery store. And I'm like, wait a minute, now I don't think we should be abandoning our pets or leaving them in the hot cars to die or anything like that. But a felony is a capital crime, and so now we have all these things, felonies, and somebody urinates behind a bush on the side of the highway, and now they're a felony sex offender, right? Now they don't have rights. I hear from people constantly that are considered felons. And much of the time now, not only is it not a capital crime, there wasn't even a victim for the crime that's a felon. Felony, the idea of felony possession is such a lawless term, because there's first of all no crime in possession of an object or a thing, and second of all, the idea that it's a felony is contradictory. A felony would have been murder. It would have been a crime punishable theoretically by death, and now everything's a felony. So people, our mindset, it seems like originally was felonies are very bad. If you're a felon, you're a bad person. So what they've done is they've just changed the bar. They've moved the bar over of what a felon is to where essentially everything is a felon. You know, you're a felon. Jake's Ryan's a felon because he dug a ditch, and that's a felony now because he dug a ditch on government property. The pure insanity. I mean, it's like we have to have mentally ill minds to look at this government and think that this has anything to do with law. This isn't law. This is terrorizing the people.
Well, not only that, I agree with everything that you said, but the fact that if they label you as a felon, you lose your gun rights. Now, this is assuming that you got some honest cops.
Yeah.
You know, if you got a dishonest cop, he goes ahead and falsely tries somebody as a felon, and they become a felon, they lose their gun rights. So in a way, it's kind of scary. They can take away our gun rights by just jacking
Making
up
everybody
some
a felon.
ridiculous felony charges to anybody.
Well, and this goes to the problem. We always say, well, the Second Amendment's the most important, or the First Amendment. I would say that's not necessarily true. You cannot have a First or a Second Amendment if you don't have a Sixth Amendment upheld. If you don't have due process in your courts, if you don't have a Sixth Amendment, all the other ones are lost. And we're seeing this firsthand with all these things. They say, we're going to charge you with this gun crime, or we're going to charge you for digging a ditch, and suddenly all our other rights are irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether it was really a crime or not, because the courts are so much in total defiance of the Fifth, Sixth, Seventh Amendments that the rest of the process is completely thrown out the window. There's no defense of the First and Second Amendment or any of the other ones, because the Sixth Amendment is no longer upheld, because the judges continually violate every precept of due process, and because the sheriffs or whoever is supposed to be protecting your rights are the ones actually standing in the courtroom with a gun on their hip, making sure that no one stands up to speak out against the treason of the judge on the bench or to perform that citizen's arrest.
I seen that going to court for the first time today. I was just
It's flabbergasting.
yeah, and seeing that the way she went, like with her hand gesture to the defense, it was just like that. You know, it was just like wow. You
Well,
know,
and consider what happened not only in the court today with the Bundy Ranch defendants, but what happened with Josh Martinez in court today.
Yeah.
He's down there, and he's in for a misdemeanor traffic offense regarding a driver's license. Okay. Now, first of all, the charge is fake. The crime is fake to begin with. But even assuming that there was a real misdemeanor offense and probable cause for it, he's in the courtroom and he's saying to the judge, "I want to understand the nature of the crime I'm being charged with," which again is a Sixth Amendment affirmation. And the judge gets irritated because he's questioning, and Josh is a very calm person in the way he debates. He's not somebody that jumps in there and shouts and hollers at people. But even if he was, his rights would not change. And so the judge is angry, so she sends him out, and they chain him to a bench in the holding cell for asking questions about his charges. And then after a while, the judge brings him back in and says, "Well, if you apologize to me, I'll let this go." Now, this is not a judge. This isn't a magistrate. This is a despotic tyrant. This person does not have any lawful authority. But she gets away with it because in a lawful society, the people in that court would jump up and they would say, "Who do you think you are?" But unfortunately, I've done that in a court before. And guess what happens? The sheriffs with their guns come and they haul you away because they're not working for you. They're not working for the law. They're working for the system, for the judge. And ironically, the sheriff that hauled me out for standing up to that judge when I dealt with this was on the list of the Constitutional Sheriffs Association. So here we are back to the same problem of I'm a constitutional sheriff because I say Constitution during the campaign trail, or I say I value the Second Amendment. We've gotten to the point, we have whole states celebrating, saying, look how constitutional we are. We finally have open carry allowed in our state, providing you have the permit. And I'm literally, I'm just shaking my head because I'm looking at a people flying a flag that's supposed to represent the liberties that all humankind are supposed to enjoy, and they're saying freedom, freedom, we're on our way to get the permit. And if you have a permit for something, it's not a freedom.
Right.
Something you get a permit for and permission for is a privilege. It's not a right. And so considering, can anyone here name anything you can do in this country that really that you don't have to get some kind of permission or permit or pay a tax for, or that ultimately there's not an authoritarian government controlling?
Breathe.
You know,
now have to get a permit on your raft. If you get those little blow-up rafts at the store and you float down the river.
Yeah, you have to have a permit for your raft?
Yeah, you have to have a little permit on them. One of my friends, actually, Matthew, that guy from Portland.
They won't be able to hear you from back here.
That's
over there.
good.
By the way, he said breathe. You know, with the carbon tax that's been proposed.
There you go.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
that will actually be a tax on breathing.
Well, and they actually tried a couple years ago, and this did fail, but our legislators in Washington were actually proposing a tax, on an extra tax for cyclists, because their heavy breathing produced more carbon emissions. And so these are the people that we're actually paying to run the government, who are saying we're the authority and we're going to send men with guns out to enforce our laws. And society is actually looking at these completely insane despots and saying, well, these people are protecting us. And the fact that society looks at these people and doesn't see it, it's like we've taken like the court jester and said, let's make him the king. Because the things that they're coming up with, they defy sanity. They're so purely absurd that it's unbelievable. Why don't you turn the camera and make her talk a little bit? Let's get some of those funds going to paypal.com/Jake Ryan, because Mrs. Ryan's the one suffering in there, and so she can take the floor and unload on us and straighten this out. PayPal.com/Jake Ryan. That is correct. Yes. Mm-hmm. And so who's sending some donations in there? It's getting late, and so everybody's going to bed. And so since you're going to be sleeping anyhow, you're not going to need money. So just go ahead and send it over there and support the message.
We have 50 people on here right now, so if every person on here gave $100, we would walk Miss Roxanna, we would drag Miss Roxanna out of this prison and tell her she's done her good, and Jake is going to be incredibly blessed and humbled, and we can get her out of here. How many children do you have? 13 children. That's why you're such a tough cookie.
Unbelievable.
And when they would come into town for the trial, they would pack their whole family in, not all kids, but a whole group of them, and they'd sleep in every corner of my house and take a little blanket. She'd say, I'm fine on the floor, I'm fine, and not need anything, and just the most independent, humble family you've ever met. I know we're not supposed to have favorites of the P3s, but they're definitely up there for me. So let's support them and support Jake, because he hasn't asked much of anything from us as a community. I think twice we've raised funds for them for gas, and I want to say it was like $120 once for your train ticket when she traveled to march with us around the jail for the first group, and we had that barbecue. And she said, I just need to be there with you guys. And then one other time we raised funds for gas, and it was like $120. And besides that, that's it. So we as a community, I think we can definitely pitch in and get to the 5,000 and help you guys out with some of your costs. Because we love ya.
You guys, it's embarrassing. This isn't about me or my family. Going back to what Gavin said, it's just like the farmer in California that got fined, what, $2.8 million for plowing his field.
I think he's facing. I don't think it's a done deal, but yeah, I think it's a civil thing. He's facing a trial where the government is seeking $2.8 million for plowing his field.
Does the world? I mean, this seems like the definition of insanity. Mm-hmm. The things. I mean, the Hammonds, the Bundys, no bail. the idea that you can have a government walk in, I don't care if it's federal or state or county or local or podunk next door, it doesn't matter. The idea that someone can come in and say, you owe us millions of dollars because you did something on your property is absolute insanity.
Well, look what they did to Joe.
Yeah, Joe Robertson dug a pond on his property that was actually for the benefit of the community. He was using it for fire protection in the forests up there in Montana, and they gave him 18 months. He's sitting in prison, abused right now, because
77 years old.
yeah, 77-year-old Navy veteran, because he dug a hole, and so and these are felony offenses now, guys. Felony offenses are things like murder, like rape, serious major crimes against your fellow human beings. These things that the government is talking about now. When the government says felony offense, what it really means is they're committing felonies and accusing the people that they're violating of felonies.
Yeah, because Joe's not done when he comes out of jail.
There's probation, there's
And
fines, there's restrictions.
Right. He has to take these, classes or treatments when he comes out?
Well, then plus
And
they
then-
probably take his land too.
Yeah.
That's their ultimate goal.
Right.
Well, this isn't just a patriot thing either. This is happening all over. There's in the Midwestern states. There was a case where you had three young Muslim boys, young men. They were 18, 19 range, and so here people are going to say, oh, they're Muslims, they belong in jail. But due process is for everybody. And these young guys, they lived in this community, and they hadn't done anything wrong. And something happened. There was some kind of a terror threat, and nobody died, nobody was hurt, but they charged these guys with terrorism. And so at their trial, the chief witness looked at these guys and they said, well, they weren't involved in this. What are they doing here? And yet they still were convicted. And they're now sitting in prison for life, these three young men taken away from their family because the government can. Because all they have to say to us is terrorist, or all they have to say is whatever the narrative is this week, right? They have to say Muslim, they have to say terrorist, domestic terrorists, they have to say bomb or gun or ammunition or rancher or Bundy or whatever it is that they use against us. And the problem is we remain divided. As long as we remain divided, I believe that our problem is that we look at the person next to us being abused and we say, well, I don't like the way they believe, or I don't like the things they do, so I'm okay with them suffering. And then we say we want freedom, and when we suffer we say, God help us, we want freedom. But there's so little mercy for us in this country because we show no mercy to our neighbor.
Now, I'm not sure exactly what states it is, but in certain states, my dad, he was on a farm in Oklahoma, and the way they got their drinking water was a cistern, and it come off the roof,
Right.
and it would go. Now, in certain states, it's illegal for you to collect rainwater, of all things. I mean, golly.
And here we're back to that same point. What can you do that's not restricted, taxed, illegal, or imprisonable? And you start looking at the facts, and this isn't a free country. This is a third world country. And everything from our laws on the streets to the way our government treats us on the streets to the way people are given due process and abused in prison, this is not a first world country. This is a third world country. We are the example of tyranny and despotism for the rest of the world, which is why we have the highest prison population on the planet. And as long as we run around waving a flag and saying, look how great we are, look how wonderful we are, at least we're still free, while we're abused for every possible infraction, we'll never restore freedom.
And I was like the ignorant public before I started getting involved with this. I had no clue that that there was so much government corruption. A lot of people, like when I first got into Nye County, I was thinking that like Nye County was a real horrible county because of the corruption that they have here, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not just Nye County, you know.
It's funny you say that, yeah.
Yeah.
I get that a lot. People will say, "Oh, you should come check out my county, Gavin. It's
Right.
so corrupt here." And I'm like, "I believe you, but you
It's
got to
the most
understand."
corrupt county in the United States.
Somebody just said that tonight about
Nye
where we're
County.
at right now.
Yeah.
And you hear it from every county that people are living in, which means that they're all completely corrupt. And so what you really have is you have a nation of no law. And if you have no law on the street, nobody to defend the law, and then you have no law in the courtrooms and your judges and your due process, you truly are a nation of anarchy in the most negative sense, not anarchy in the
Yeah.
sense that some people use it that's more like libertarianism, but anarchy and there's no law. And I see government literally, look at Navarro in these recent trials, they just flat make it up as they go, because there is absolutely no one who will hold them accountable.
Well, look how much time the prosecution had, as opposed to how much time the defense had. How many witnesses the prosecution had as opposed to how much the defense had. We couldn't even get Margaret Houston up there, you know, on the stand.
Yeah, and then you've got Judge Anna Brown in the Portland trials that say to the guys on the 10 added charges from the original indictments, you're not going to get a jury by trial on these 10 added charges because I have the power to do it. And she said, I can even take your counsel away if I so deem, but I guess I'll let you keep your counsel. And so those 10 added charges were not given the right to jury by trial. And she called so many witnesses from that second trial. We had one day we had 7 witnesses for Jake that the government had flown down, put up for the night, and then that morning the prosecutor went through the list and said, no, you can't have this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one. So we were allowed 2 out of the 7, and the 2 were allowed to say maybe 3 or 4 sentences, and that was about it.
Wow.
And it just took place all the time in the court. I mean, she struck videos that we wanted to present. They critiqued the testimonies and striked out what they didn't want to be said. It was ludicrous what took place.
And some people say, well, he had a trial by jury, so he clearly was guilty. And I tell him, go sit in on a courtroom and then
Right.
tell me after you watch that wasn't a complete setup.
The government spent thousands of dollars for a jury consultant in that second trial.
Yep. So Roger was going to read something from the book here.
This is my book, The Conviction Factory, The Collapse of America's Criminal Courts. Available on Amazon. This is sort of a book about the adversarial process. And, you know, it's funny, I mean, we all of us have an interest in the criminal justice system here. And we read up about cases and criminal controversies and things. And I got, over time, I've started to really study, well, what is a proper system of justice? And frankly, I've searched far and wide, and you look at different systems around the world, and I will actually say that the Anglo-American system is the best possible system of criminal justice. It's far better than systems that exist. I'm talking about in its ideal form, by the way, which we don't really have right now in most places even in the Anglo-American sphere of law. But you look around the world, the Muslim systems, most of them are terrible. Justice systems in Syria or Jordan are horrible, horrible systems. Asian systems, Chinese criminal justice is horrible. You can be arrested and convicted and executed in China within 30 days, right now, you know. And all of us, we cuss and condemn our own system, and it is horrible as applied. But it's probably still superior to the Chinese system or the system in Syria and places like this. Anyway, I got to thinking a lot about what is it about our system, the Anglo, by meaning English, the Anglo-American system. You know, we actually inherited the English system. We did not inherit, as Americans, the Spanish system or the German or the French system. We are heirs to the most libertarian system of justice that ever existed. The English system. You know, it's funny, a lot of people don't realize this, and it took me a long time to really study up and just realize that libertarianism largely is English. And it's a sort of a quirk of world history. The English went through all these sort of revolutions and civil wars. There were periods when the English had different branches of government that were waging war against each other. The king, for example, was waging a war against the parliament in the English Civil War in the 1640s. Fascinating history, by the way. Anyway, I'm just going to read a little bit of my book, the introduction. There is an age-old debate in the criminal justice system about whether the system's highest aim is the determination of truth or the production of justice in some other sense. American students learn of this debate in the contours of comparisons between the adversarial justice model on display in the vestiges of the British Empire, by the way, we are one of those, with the inquisitorial or civil law models found in continental and Eastern Europe and elsewhere in the world. The adversarial or common law tradition, again, that's the English system, pits the prosecution against the defendant on a level playing field, with a judge acting as something of an impartial referee and a jury of the defendant's peers, or at least one composed of common citizens, having the final say in whether the government can punish the defendant. By contrast, the civil law or inquisitorial tradition offers authorities a broader array of investigative powers to determine a defendant's guilt. So if you look around the world, you see most systems are inquisitorial systems. They have the judge, the person determining the facts and deciding the case, is actually a branch of the government, not a neutral player like we have, at least ideally, in our system. In our system, the adversarial system, the judge is supposed to be a neutral referee. American criminal justice, having descended from the English common law, is based upon the adversarial tradition. This model is grounded in distrust and suspicion of government. Indeed, its presumption of innocence, if stated differently, is a presumption that the government is wrong and that its prosecution is meritless or abusive. Unlike European systems of justice, dominated by judge and prosecution, writes American crime historian Roger Lane, in ours, the parties are not even supposed to be engaged in an impartial search for truth. And when the truth is unknown, unproven, or unknowable, the result must be acquittal. Judges are to act as passive and disinterested referees. Moreover, by inserting the will of common laymen, the adversarial system allows for the outright obstruction of the state, regardless of the evidence. It's very important when you think about our system. We don't often think about these things. By contrast, the vast majority of countries on earth use some form of inquisitorial courts to adjudicate criminal guilt and punishment. In such courts, the deciders are themselves government agents. Proceedings may be in secret. Judges act along with prosecutors to sift through evidence and arguments in order to decide guilt or innocence. Inquisitorial justice eschews the input of commoners and looks to the supposed greater trustworthiness of respected state functionaries. The essence of inquisitorial proceedings, writes Jenny McEwen, is that the state is interested in the outcome and wishes an investigator to discover as many relevant facts as possible. Rather than a presumption of innocence, inquisitorial investigations stem from a presumption that a crime has been committed. The court itself will pursue facts and avail itself of any sources, as judges are expected to arrive at the truth by their own exertions. The parties generally have no power to prevent the inquisitorial judge from seeing any desired item of evidence. Inquisitorial judges may at times show leniency to defendants or criticize the government, but they risk sanction or punishment themselves if they are seen as outright nullifiers of authority. And although acquittal rates have declined considerably in the American system over the past century, American defendants are still more likely to be acquitted than defendants in inquisitorial regimes. According to Professor Mike P.H. Chu, CHU, the average acquittal rate in inquisitorial systems is 2.4%, compared to an 11% acquittal rate for those who take charges to trial in adversarial systems in comparable years. Anyway, this is from my book, The Conviction Factory,
That's awesome.
available on Amazon.com. I invite any of you to go ahead and read this book, to find this book.
Pretty lucky to have Roger on our team.
We are. Roger has been awesome, and that's been such a blessing to have so many people come together and want to help, and want to contribute, because they are activists by nature. They want to fight for what's right and be active in the community, and
And they've got a good heart.
very good heart.
Did you tell the story about how the sheriff dealt with Jake Ryan when they came after him, with Jake
Oh,
when they came
that's a
after
good
him
one.
in your county? Because I thought that was very poignant. Here you had a sheriff that said he was constitutional and he was going to stand with the people, and it didn't work out that way.
No, it didn't work out.
Do you want to talk about that meeting, the first meeting? Or no? Okay, we won't. Let's see, what else? Do
Are
guys
you
have-
originally from Montana?
No, when I was 14, like I said, we immigrated up to British Columbia and homesteaded up there. And I met my husband up there, and we came down to school, and he became a teacher, and then he was a construction worker, and lived in the States since. But I was originally born in Safford, Arizona. So we've been in Montana for 18 years. We've been there quite a while.
How long was Jake incarcerated until he got bail after
He
the
was
refuge?
in prison for 3 months.
3 months. That was a rough 3 months. I remember times you came to visit him and you weren't on the list, even though you were on the list, and then you had to fight to see him.
Almost every time. They'd say, no, you can't see him, you're not on the list. And we'd have to fight to see him.
Wow.
Did he talk about the Portland jail system up there?
There's a lot he didn't share with us. He just doesn't want to talk about it. There's once in a while he'll open up a little bit about it, but there's a lot he just hasn't shared.
So do you feel like just even 3 months in jail was, I mean, when we look at the guys here at 400 and, what are they at? I think Ammon said today 488 days or something, or is that sound too high?
All right.
488 days, and Jake hasn't even processed his 90 days.
Right. No. He says it's awful. Yeah. He says the term rotting in prison is a literal term. He says you literally rot in prison. Physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Did he spend any of that time in solitary confinement?
Not that he's shared with us.
Well, he would have, I guess, at the beginning, so the first 2 weeks. They
Right.
keep him in the hole after any move, but
He got to know the inmates. He told us a few stories about some of the inmates. One was a Russian who had come over. He had 7 kids. And I can't remember why. I want to say something like homeschooling the kids, and he was turned in, and he was thrown into prison. All his kids were split up and put into foster homes, and his wife was deported back to Russia. And about broke Jake's heart to talk about it. He couldn't barely talk about it without tears in his eyes. Because he said the sadness in this man's face was awful.
And what was he in there for?
I can't remember, but it was something really bogus.
Something fake?
Yeah. I want to say something about homeschooling because he chose to homeschool his kids when they came over. Anyway, it really touched Jake's heart, and they got along really good.
How does Jake's public defender feel about his sentencing in his case? Are as far as the timeline goes, it's a max of 7 years or 10 years and $100,000 restitution.
I don't think he really knows. He tends to think that Judge Anna Brown won't give him jail time. But at the same time, he was amazed at the result of the second trial. He didn't think that was coming. But, so I don't know. I just keep telling him, a rattlesnake is always a rattlesnake. You can't disguise it, and you can't pretend it's not a rattlesnake. If you do, you're going to get bit. And so we have to go in there fighting to the very end.
All right, guys. Well, I think we'll go ahead and sign off for a minute and check in with the PayPal managers of Jake Ryan's funds and see where he's at and see how late of a night it's going to be for Roxanna Ryan. Is there anything else you want to say?
Thank you. And like I said, there's so much more than just money, guys.
Well, Roxanna didn't necessarily even want to ask for money for any donations for her family. She wanted it to go to one of the other political prisoner families, Ryan Bundy or Eric Parker or one of the others. And because of the situation they're in, we had to convince her that she is the political prisoner family and it's okay to raise money for her son for the work that he's doing on his case. And he's just as important as any of the other political prisoners. And we have people have really stepped up in this last year. I look at people like a lot of the Bundys have people helping them with their bills every month. Daryl Thorne has had his bills virtually paid every month all year long. People have really stepped up, and it's okay to let people help you. Jake's important too.
Yes.
So thank you for letting us do this and help you raise some funds while you're standing in the spot of your son and seeing what Ammon went through. So we'll go ahead and come back in an hour, guys, maybe at the top of the hour. I don't know what time it is because Gavin's clock is broken, but
1 minute.
Broken.
okay, so 1 o'clock we'll come back if you guys want to come back on and check on Roxanna and see if she's in the fetal position on the floor yet, talking to lizards like I was the other night.
There's a lizard there. Hi,
To my
lizard.
credit, I talked to all little creatures and animals, and if I was at home and it was one of the baby bunnies, I would have talked to it too. And
Well, but also toward the end, your math was turned into Common Core math.
oh, jeez, was it? But yeah, that was probably not the right time for me to say hi to that little lizard. But every time I would talk, its little eyeball would go back and stare at me, and so, you know. Okay, so anyway, we're gonna sign off. We'll see you guys back in an hour. Check in on Roxanna, and we'll give you guys an update on how she's doing. Her goal is 13 hours or $5,000 in the torture chamber to get a taste of what Ammon Bundy went through when Core Civic CCA Southern Nevada Detention Center held him for 13 hours in a shower overnight, handcuffed over a shirt. God bless, guys.